Hello. My name is Annalise. Every morning, I made coffee at my grandfather's café, wiping down tables, serving pastries, opening the doors before the city was even awake. And every morning, my sister pulled up in her black SUV, rolled down the window just enough and tossed 30 cents at me. "Here's your tip," she'd say. 3 dimes. Every day. They told me I wasn't really part of the family legacy, just the help. But when Grandpa died, he left me everything. $7 million. Not because I asked. But because I stayed. Now my family wants it back. The lies, the legal threats, the public humiliation, they thought it would break me. But have you ever been erased so thoroughly that all you had left was proof? Would you like to know what I did with it? I unlocked the front door to Brannigan's Brew at exactly 5:27 a.m., like I did every morning. 3 minutes early, always 3. Not because it made much of a difference to anyone else, but because those quiet few minutes belonged to me. I liked them. They helped me pretend the rest of the day wouldn't unravel. Savannah was still draped in a soft gray mist outside the windows, street lamps flickering like they weren't quite ready to give up the night. The cafe smelled of old wood, vanilla beans, and faint cinnamon, what my grandfather used to call home without saying it out loud. I'd inherited the habit of talking to the machines. Flipping the espresso switch, I whispered, "Don't fail me today, baby." The thing coughed, blinked, then began to hum. I wiped down the counters, set out the mismatched mugs, and checked the pastries we'd prepped the night before. Banana bread still moist, apple tarts holding shape. Good enough for a Tuesday. I moved through the motions like I always did, measured, familiar, quiet. There was a rhythm to it all, one I could trust. By 6:15, Mrs. Dorsey was already settled at her usual corner table, reading her same beat-up copy of Murder in the Blue Ridge. She ordered the same thing every day, black coffee, half-sugar packet, no lid. By 6:40, I'd made 5 lattes, 2 chai teas, and a pour-over for the real estate guy who always brought in contracts to sign. I didn't ask questions, he didn't ask my name. Then it hit 7:15. And just like every other morning, the air shifted. You ever feel that? The change in the room when someone walks in thinking they own it? Callista's SUV, black, spotless, soulless, pulled up right outside. She didn't just park. She arrived. Designer sunglasses, perfect blowout, nails sharp enough to draw blood. She stepped through the door with her usual dramatic pause, letting the room take her in like a stage cue. The bell above the door rang for her differently. Or maybe I just heard it that way. Customers turned. They always did. Some out of recognition, others curiosity. Nobody could ignore Callista Vaughn, even if they wanted to. She made a show of looking around, lips pursed like she'd walked into a gas station bathroom, not the cafe that had paid for her ballet lessons once upon a time. She didn't even pretend she was there for coffee. Just 3 long, polished strides to the counter. I didn't look up at first. I was finishing a cappuccino for the young vet student who always tipped with folded origami bills. But I felt her presence, the way you feel humidity before a thunderstorm. Then she spoke. Well, she said, loud enough for half the cafe to hear. "Still here, huh?" I met her eyes. Briefly. "Good morning," I said calmly. She pulled out a few coins from her coat pocket, jangling them in her hand like they were dice she was about to roll. Then, clink, 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 3 dimes hit the counter, bouncing once before settling into a crooked line. "That's your tip," she smiled. "Feeling generous today." I heard the flicker of gasps, tiny ones, the kind people swallow fast. The student looked away. Mrs. Dorsey froze mid-sip. Even Detective Rourke, who always read the paper like nothing in the world mattered, lowered it an inch. My throat didn't close, but it wanted to. I didn't let it. I smiled. "Thank you, Callista." I said it like it meant something. Like I'd earned it. Like her petty coins were golden tokens from a place I wanted to be let into. She tilted her head, examining me like a stain on her favorite blouse. Then, without ordering anything, she turned and walked out, heels tapping the tile like punctuation marks. When the door swung shut, I stared at the 30 cents. I didn't touch them. Not right away. I went back to work. Made a mocha for the man with the beard who never said a word. Cleaned the milk steamer, wiped down the register, cleared a table near the window. When I finally picked up the coins, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel shame. I felt tired. But beneath the tired, there was something else. A throb. Not quite anger. Not yet. After the morning rush, I stood at the back counter and stared into the tiny utility sink. My hands were still damp from wiping surfaces. The rag hung limp from my wrist. I remembered my 18th birthday. Back then, Callista had surprised me with a leather-bound sketchbook, dark brown, embossed, wrapped with a suede cord. She handed it to me like I didn't deserve it, but I'd thanked her like it was a treasure. I kept it in a box for years, only using it for drawings I felt were good enough. I believed, for a long time, it was her way of saying I mattered. 2 years ago, Grandpa Harold mentioned that sketchbook in passing. We'd been sorting through some storage bins, and he said, "Glad you liked that one. Found it in Charleston, thought the cover looked like your grandmother's old journal." I blinked. "Wait, you got that for me?" He nodded, already moving on to another story. He didn't know what he'd revealed. He thought he was reminiscing. But that one sentence unraveled something. So many memories I'd labeled as Callista being kind had tiny cracks in them. Things that never quite made sense. Things I never questioned, because questioning meant rewriting the version of family I clung to. I still have the sketchbook. Still in its box. I'd always thought of it as a symbol of our bond. Now it's just a relic of a lie. Back at the sink, I realized my hands had curled into fists without me noticing. I uncurled them. Took a breath. Customers were thinning out. The cafe had returned to its hum, mugs clinking, low conversation, a playlist of soft jazz meandering through the air. I emptied the coin tray from the register, then paused. Reached into my apron pocket and dropped the 30 cents inside. Not out of spite. Not because I needed it. Because it was proof. Proof that I'd stood there, endured it, and didn't crack. I've kept worse than 30 cents. This wouldn't break me. But it just might be what breaks her. I locked up the cafe a little after 3 that afternoon. The sound of the latch sliding into place echoed longer than usual, like the day didn't want to end quietly. I slipped my apron off and folded it, tucking it into my bag. The 30 cents were still there, 3 small coins pressing against the fabric like they had weight beyond their metal. I didn't take them out. Somehow, I wanted them close. The air outside was warm but carried the lazy chill of early spring. The oak trees along Whitaker Street bent toward one another like they were conspiring. I walked slowly, partly because my legs ached, partly because I wasn't in a hurry to face the silence waiting at home. The sidewalks in Savannah have this way of holding memories, cracked stones, old brick walls, little ghosts of things people said to each other long ago. I passed a bakery that used to belong to one of my grandfather's friends, now run by a couple of 20-somethings who'd never heard of Harold Brannigan. They smiled at me anyway. I smiled back, pretending the gesture landed somewhere deep. It didn't. Grandpa's 75th anniversary party was coming up next month, 50 years of legacy, as my mother called it, and I'd promised to bring an old picture for the slideshow. That's why I was heading home. I had the photo folded neatly in my tote, Grandpa standing in front of the cafe in 1989, when the sign still read Brannigan's and Ruth's Brew. His hair darker, his grin wider. I wanted it in the collection. When I turned onto the quiet street where I grew up, I slowed. The house looked the same, white siding, green shutters, 2 perfect flower beds my mother kept like a battlefield. Even the porch light was on, though it was still daylight. She always said it welcomed good spirits. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and something floral, too clean, too artificial. "Mom?" I called. In the living room, sweetheart. Her voice had that light, polished tone she used when company was over or she was preparing to correct someone. I followed the sound, my shoes squeaking softly on the hardwood. She was seated at the dining table, surrounded by piles of photo albums, envelopes, and a small mountain of glossy prints. Each one was labeled in her slanted handwriting, family holidays, Callista's graduation, legacy moments. "There you are," she said, not looking up. "I was just finishing the album for the celebration. You remember the one I told you about?" I nodded, setting my bag down on the chair beside me. "I brought that photo of Grandpa in front of the cafe. Thought it might fit near the early years section." She smiled briefly. "How thoughtful." I watched her flip through the pages. The cover read, in gold lettering, Harold Brannigan, 50 years of legacy. She turned it toward me. "Look how beautiful this will be projected on the big screen. Everyone will love it." I leaned closer. There was Grandpa with Grandma Ruth, then with my parents, then with Callista at her law school graduation. Another of him holding Callista as a baby. One of the whole family at Thanksgiving, except it wasn't the whole family. I wasn't there. I kept turning pages. Every image of the cafe, every family event, every smiling pose, it was as if I had never existed. My chest went hollow. "Mom," I said softly. Where am I?" She didn't glance up, still adjusting a photo corner. "You weren't really present for most of these, dear. We didn't want to confuse people." "Confuse them?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I meant. "How would a picture of me confuse anyone?" Her fingers stilled. She finally met my eyes. "You know what I mean. You were always doing your own thing. You've never been in the spotlight. And this album is about legacy." I stared at her. "So I'm not part of that?" Her lips thinned. "Don't be dramatic, Anara. You're part of the family. We just want to keep it cohesive." Cohesive. A word for curtains, not people. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The photo of Grandpa I'd brought suddenly felt like a confession, not a gift. I laid it on the table gently. "Use it if you want." She smiled in that smooth, dismissive way she'd perfected. "Of course. We'll see where it fits." I didn't stay long. The house, with its framed photos and soft music humming from the kitchen radio, felt like a museum curated by someone who'd rewritten history. I stepped outside into the dimming afternoon, breathing in the scent of wet grass and car exhaust. By the time I reached the cafe again the next morning, I'd folded myself back into quiet. The place looked peaceful, too peaceful. Grandpa wasn't there yet, he was visiting a friend at the Veterans Center. I started prepping the espresso machine when I heard the bell chime. Mrs. Eudora came in, wrapped in her oversized cardigan, leaning on her cane but moving with purpose. She was one of Grandpa's oldest friends, one of the few who'd been around since the cafe's early days. "Well, if it isn't our little soldier," she said, her eyes warm. "You're keeping this place alive better than anyone could." I smiled faintly. "Trying to, at least." She ordered her usual, decaf, 1 sugar, 1 cream. As I handed her the cup, she lowered her voice. "Your sister was here the other day." I froze, cup still in hand. "Callista?" She nodded. "Came in with some gentleman in a gray suit. Looked like a banker. They were asking about square footage, zoning, insurance on the building. Not a word about Harold." My stomach turned. "Are you sure that's what they were talking about?" Mrs. Eudora raised an eyebrow. "I may be old, not deaf. They even mentioned redevelopment. I don't know what game she's playing, but you be careful, sweetheart." "Thank you," I said quietly. She patted my hand before taking her cup to her corner seat. I stood behind the counter for a long moment, listening to the sound of the ceiling fan clicking as it spun. Callista wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was planning something. Something bigger. Later that day, after the lunch crowd thinned, I started wiping tables. I found a crumpled sheet of paper near the register. It wasn't one of our order slips, it was heavier, glossier. My name wasn't on it, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Callista's tidy, slanted script. At the top, circled in red, Zone R3, potential commercial redevelopment. Underneath, in smaller print, good profit margin. Aging tenant. Tenant. My chest tightened. They were talking about Grandpa. I sank into one of the empty chairs, paper trembling in my hands. Outside, the light shifted, afternoon fading into that strange, golden hour when everything looks softer, even the things that hurt. I folded the paper neatly, then took out my phone. The camera clicked softly as I captured the evidence. In the gallery, the image looked almost harmless. Just ink on white paper. But I knew what it meant. I saved it under a new folder, naming it for later. Then I locked the cafe for the night, turning off each light slowly, one by one. The last glow disappeared, leaving the reflection of my face in the glass door, tired, smaller than I remembered, but clearer somehow. I didn't need to understand everything yet. I just needed to keep watching. The folder on my phone wasn't enough. It sat there like a whisper I couldn't unhear, proof that something was moving beneath the surface. For the next 2 weeks, I woke up before dawn, walked to the cafe through the heavy mist, and told myself that if I just paid attention, really listened, I might finally understand what my sister was trying to take from us. The cafe had always been a living thing to me, breathing in the smell of roasted beans and exhaling warmth through its old wooden walls. But lately, every sound inside it felt sharpened. The grinder's hum, the soft tap of cups, even the bell above the door, they all carried tension now. I kept my phone close, the recorder app tucked behind the point-of-sale screen. It wasn't about paranoia anymore, it was strategy. Whenever Callista came in, which, oddly, she'd begun doing again, I'd tap record without looking down. The first few visits were almost friendly. She'd order a chai she never drank, make small talk about how quaint the place still looked, then check her reflection in the espresso machine like it was a mirror. I gave her nothing. Not a smile, not a word she could twist. One morning, she lingered longer than usual. She stood near the pastry display, talking on her phone in a voice meant to be overheard. Yes, he's still signing invoices himself. No, he hasn't delegated anything yet. We'll handle that soon. I turned away before she caught me looking. My pulse thudded in my ears. She wasn't talking about work. She was talking about Grandpa. By the time the clock hit 9, the regulars had cleared out and sunlight stretched across the tile floor in long golden lines. I was refilling sugar jars when the door opened again. The sound of expensive heels clicked against the floor, followed by another set of slower, heavier steps. I didn't need to look to know it was her. But the man following her was new, gray suit, leather briefcase, the kind of polished confidence that smelled like money and plans. They walked straight to the back table by the window, where the light was kindest. I stayed behind the counter, pretending to clean. My hands moved automatically, wipe, rinse, wipe again, but my focus locked on their reflections in the window. Callista leaned forward, speaking softly. The man scribbled notes, occasionally nodding. Their words reached me in pieces, carried by the whir of the ceiling fan and the faint hiss of the steamer. Property line extends past the alley. Rezoning request, commercial. 2.3 million at current market value. I swallowed hard. Every phrase sliced through me. They weren't talking about an idea or a dream, they were dismantling my grandfather's life, brick by brick, while sitting in the place he built. I wiped the same spot on the counter until my knuckles went white. I didn't move closer. I didn't make a sound. I just turned on my phone and pressed record. The conversation went on for 15 minutes. When the man finally closed his folder and stood, Callista reached out, touching his arm lightly. "We'll make it happen before Q4, she said. "He won't know what hit him." Her laugh, soft, rehearsed, cut through me like cold metal. They left together, her perfume trailing behind like arrogance in liquid form. I waited until the door shut and the silence settled again before moving. My body felt strange, steady on the outside, but inside everything was racing. I walked to the table where they'd sat. 2 coffee cups sat half full, lipstick on one rim, no sugar packets opened. Callista had left behind a manila folder, thin but heavy with intent. I looked toward the window, half expecting her to walk back in, then flipped it open. Blueprints. Valuation sheets. A folded map of downtown Savannah. The map was what made my stomach turn. I spread it across the table, smoothing it out with trembling fingers. There it was, Brannigan's Brew Café, outlined in bright red ink. Next to it, a yellow sticky note, convert before Q4. I felt like someone had punched the air out of me. That cafe wasn't just a building. It was every morning I spent with Grandpa, every story he told about Grandma Ruth, every drop of sweat he'd poured into keeping it alive when everyone else said small places couldn't survive big chains. And my sister had turned it into a line item. I folded the map carefully, not to damage it, but to own it. Evidence, again. My hand shook as I slid it into my bag. For a few minutes, I just sat there. The sun had moved, landing directly on the old photo of Ruth and Grandpa framed near the register. They looked happy, like the kind of happy that can't be bought or staged. I realized I hadn't seen that look on anyone in my family in years. When Grandpa came in later that afternoon, he moved slower than usual, cane tapping lightly on the floor. His shoulders curved forward like the years were sitting on them, but his eyes still carried the same spark they always had. He sat down at his corner table, the one near the window, and opened his worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. "Morning, sweetheart," he said. "Or should I say afternoon?" "Afternoon works," I said, smiling softly. "You hungry?" "Just for coffee." I poured him a cup, his usual, half regular, half decaf, a dash of milk. He took it with both hands, inhaled the aroma, and sighed. Place still smells like Ruth's coffee, he murmured. Can't fake that, you know. I watched him take the first sip. There were tiny tremors in his fingers, ones he pretended weren't there. His glasses slid down his nose, and he pushed them back with a habit so practiced it felt sacred. Grandpa, I said, careful not to let my voice shake. What would you do if someone wanted to take this place away? He looked up at me, brow furrowing. Who'd want that? Just hypothetically. He chuckled softly. Well, I'd tell them they could have the bricks, but not the soul. He didn't notice the way my throat tightened. When he went back to his book, I stood there, staring out the same window he'd spent half his life looking through. Cars rolled past, people walked their dogs, kids from the college down the street laughed too loudly. Life went on like it didn't know what we were standing to lose. I pulled my phone from my apron and opened the For Later folder. The photos from the last few weeks stared back, the marked zoning paper, the property notes, the map now folded in my bag. I added one more, the picture I'd just taken of Grandpa reading by the window, unaware of the storm forming around him. Then I changed the folder's name. They won't take this. The screen dimmed, my reflection faint in the glass, eyes tired, mouth set. The kind of face that had stopped waiting for permission. I wasn't just listening anymore. I was preparing. The folder on my phone glowed faintly in the dark kitchen light as I reheated leftover soup for dinner. They won't take this. The name pulsed across the screen like a vow. I hadn't changed much else in the 2 weeks since finding that map, but I'd changed that. And somehow that one act, renaming a folder, made everything feel irreversible. It was Thursday when the text came. Mom never used punctuation when she was serious. Family dinner Sunday. Important to discuss your grandfather. I stared at it longer than I should have, the spoon frozen in my hand. Discuss your grandfather. Not spend time with. Discuss, like he was an agenda item, not a person. By Sunday, I'd made myself a promise, no surprises. I cooked one of Grandpa's favorites, chicken pot pie from scratch, just to have something to hold on to. I told myself maybe it really was a dinner, maybe it would just be a check-in. But deep down, I knew better. The house looked the same as always, neat, polished, cold. My sister's SUV was already in the driveway, gleaming in the early evening light. I parked my old Corolla behind it, grabbed the warm dish from the passenger seat, and took a deep breath before knocking on the front door. Mom opened it with a smile too bright to be real. There you are. Come in, honey. We've been waiting. Waiting. The smell of garlic bread filled the air, but it was drowned by something sharper, the tension that always built when Callista was around. She sat in the dining room already, wine glass in hand, one leg crossed over the other. Dad was at the head of the table, flipping through a folder like this was a business meeting. I set the pot pie down on the counter. I brought something for dinner. Mom glanced over. Oh, how sweet. We actually already have plenty, but thank you. Of course they did. I joined them at the table anyway. The first few minutes were normal enough, surface-level talk about weather, work, polite smiles. Then Callista cleared her throat. Well, she said, setting her glass down. We're here because we're concerned. About Grandpa. And about you, Anara. I looked up slowly. Concerned? Dad spoke next, his tone careful. Your grandfather's health has been declining. He's getting older. The cafe's a lot to handle. And you've been doing a wonderful job, Mom added quickly, as if that softened the blow. But this isn't sustainable, dear. You can't keep running yourself ragged. I'm not ragged, I said. Callista smiled the way people do when they're about to take something from you and want you to think it's for your own good. We just think it might be time to make some decisions. Proactive ones. There's a really lovely assisted living facility near Forsyth Park. I actually visited it, just to get a feel for what's available. My fork paused midair. You did what? It's nothing decided yet, she said lightly. Just research. You know me, I like to be prepared. I set the fork down. Does Grandpa know about this? Her smile didn't falter. He trusts us to do what's right for him. There it was, that word again. Us. Mom reached for her water glass. Callista just wants to make sure we're all on the same page. All of us? I asked quietly. Because it sounds like the page was written before I got here. Dad sighed, rubbing his forehead. Let's all stay calm. I stared at each of them, my pulse steady now instead of racing. This wasn't about care. It wasn't about Grandpa's health. It was about control, his, mine, the cafe's. Selling the cafe would relieve so much stress, Callista continued, voice measured. And frankly, it's not exactly turning a profit anymore. The building's old, the equipment's outdated. We could use the funds to ensure Grandpa's comfort. I leaned forward. He's comfortable where he is. That cafe is his comfort. Her tone softened to the kind of false empathy that made my teeth clench. You're too close to see it, Anara. Sometimes love blinds us from what's practical. Practical? I repeated. Is that what you call it when you erase people from photo albums, too? The silence that followed was sharp. Mom froze mid-sip. Dad's hand dropped from his forehead. Callista blinked once, then recovered. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do, I said. You've been cleaning up history to make your version of this family look tidy. She tilted her head. You're being emotional. I'm being honest. The words landed heavier than I expected. No one spoke for several seconds. Outside, the hum of cicadas filled the pause. Finally, Mom broke the silence. We all just want what's best, sweetheart. I nodded slowly. So do I. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. You want to talk about what's best? Let's talk about what that looks like. With a few taps, I opened the app one used to track Grandpa's daily care, every appointment, every medication, every note from his doctors. This, I said, turning the screen toward them, is what taking care of him looks like. Not phone calls and meetings. Not planning without him. This. Mom blinked, visibly uncomfortable. That's very impressive, dear, but what? I interrupted. You want to move him out of his home because it's convenient for you? Because you can't stand that he still has a say? Callista's expression hardened. That's not fair. We're just being responsible. I locked eyes with her. No. You're being strategic. Dad exhaled through his nose, as if trying to calm a storm. Anara, please. Let's not turn this into a fight. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm not fighting. I'm clarifying. I swiped through the photos on my phone until I found the picture I'd taken of the redevelopment map, the red ink circling the cafe like a target. I didn't show it to them, not yet, but just looking at it reminded me why I couldn't let them win. If any more conversations about Grandpa's future happen without him, or without me, you'll need to speak with my lawyer next, I said evenly. The room went still. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Dad's fork clinked against his plate. Callista's perfect composure flickered for the first time. Her voice dropped an octave. You'd bring lawyers into this? If that's what it takes to protect him. She laughed quietly, like I'd said something absurd. You always overreact, Anara. You make everything personal. I looked at her. It is personal. No one had anything left to say after that. The smell of garlic and herbs lingered in the silence. I pushed back my chair, the scrape of wood against tile echoing louder than it should have. I think we're done here. Anara, Mom began, but I was already on my feet. I grabbed my bag, nodded politely to no one in particular, and walked out the front door without looking back. The evening air was cooler than before, the sky painted in the faint oranges of a setting sun. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, dogs barking, a lawn mower in the distance, kids laughing on bikes. Normal life went on while mine tilted slightly on its axis. For a fleeting second, I almost felt sorry for them, caught in their polished little world, pretending their betrayal was compassion. Almost. But pity didn't protect anyone. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my shoes. When I started the engine, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked different. Not angry. Not scared. Just decided. They wanted a meeting about family. I'd just given them one. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed, watching the thin stripe of streetlight crawl across the ceiling until it faded into dawn. My mind kept replaying every word from that dinner: assisted living, responsibility, you're being emotional. They'd thrown those phrases like darts and then smiled as if I should thank them for aiming so well. By 5, I was already dressed. The world outside was still half asleep, the kind of quiet where even the birds hesitate. I made coffee strong enough to burn away whatever was left of last night's anger, then gathered my laptop, planner, and the old manila folder that had become my shadow. At the café, the lock turned easier than usual, as if the door knew I needed something to cooperate for once. I flicked on the lights. The warm hum of the espresso machine filled the silence, steadying me. This was my territory. Here, I didn't have to prove who I was. But that was about to change. I set my things down on the counter and started working. I printed screenshots from my phone, medication reminders, appointment confirmations, texts from Dr. Phillips about dosage changes. I opened my email and scrolled through months of correspondence, scheduling lab tests, prescription refills, even that night in January when Grandpa had a dizzy spell, and I'd driven him to urgent care before sunrise. Every message timestamped, every action recorded. By the time the printer ran out of paper, the counter looked like a battlefield of proof. I began sorting. One folder labeled health records, another finances, another family communications. I wasn't doing it just to prepare for them, I was doing it for me. Because I knew, one day soon, they'd twist everything to make me look reckless. And I refused to let them write my story for me again. Around 7, I heard the familiar shuffle of footsteps behind me. "You're here early," Grandpa said, voice groggy but warm. I turned, forcing a small smile. Couldn't sleep. He moved to his usual seat by the counter, cane leaning against his leg. He looked older than he did a few months ago, the lines deeper, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. But his eyes still had that spark, the one that had built this cafe from nothing. "You're looking at me like you expect me to forget something," he said. I set a mug in front of him. "No," I said softly. "I'm just remembering everything for you." He chuckled, that low, easy laugh that made the years between us feel like nothing. "You always were the organized one. Ruth used to say I'd lose my head if it weren't attached." I smiled, stirring his coffee the way he liked, half regular, half decaf, one sugar. "You'd manage. Maybe not gracefully, but you'd manage." He took a sip and sighed. "This place wouldn't stand without you, you know. Ruth would have said the same." The words hit me deeper than he probably realized. I turned away quickly, pretending to tidy the pastry case, blinking faster than necessary. "She'd probably tell you to stop worrying about me." He didn't answer. Just watched me quietly. Sometimes silence between us said more than words ever could. For a while, everything was normal. The morning rush trickled in, regulars chatting, the scent of espresso warming the air. But around 9, the bell above the door chimed, and my stomach dropped. Callista walked in, followed by Mom. Neither wore the polite smiles reserved for public. This was their business face, the one that looked too calm to be real. I straightened. "We're closed for cleaning." Mom's voice carried that patient tone that meant she was about to condescend. "We won't be long, dear. We just wanted to talk, just a quick update." Grandpa looked up, surprised but pleased. "Well, look who decided to visit," he said. Callista's smile was flawless. "Of course, Grandpa. You know we're always thinking of you." He gestured toward the seats near the counter. Sit. Want coffee?" They both declined. I didn't. I poured myself a strong cup, letting the bitter scent fill the gap where my nerves sat. Mom began. "We've been doing more research about assisted living communities." "Communities," I repeated flatly. "That's what we're calling them now." "Don't start," she warned softly. "We're just trying to plan ahead." "For who?" I asked. "For everyone," Callista said, smooth as glass. "Especially you. You can't keep doing this alone. We found a facility with on-site medical staff and lovely grounds. It would be a relief for all of us." I set my cup down. The clink echoed. "A relief," I said. Interesting choice of words. Mom sighed. "Please don't be difficult." I turned toward Grandpa. "Do you want to move?" He looked caught off guard. "What? No. Why would I?" Callista cut in, voice sugar-coated. "You don't have to decide right now. We're just exploring options." I took a deep breath, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest, the mix of anger and exhaustion that had become second nature. But instead of snapping, I walked to the counter, picked up the thick binder I'd been building since sunrise, and laid it flat in front of them. "This," I said, opening it, "is what exploring looks like. Every appointment, every medication, every doctor's note. Every message you ignored while planning your options." Callista's face didn't change, but her knuckles went white around her purse strap. These are the realities, I continued. Not your talking points. Not your projections. Mom tried to smile, but her eyes darted toward the papers like they were contagious. That's impressive, dear. But it doesn't change. It changes everything, I interrupted. You keep saying you're acting out of love, but love doesn't erase the person it's supposed to protect. Grandpa frowned slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. What's going on here? Callista turned to him, voice sweet again. Nothing, Grandpa. Just sorting through some responsibilities. I laughed once, low and sharp. Responsibilities. That's new. You usually call them opportunities. Her jaw tightened. You're twisting things. I'm documenting things, I said, sliding another sheet toward her. See the timestamps? They're all dated. Verified. Try to explain those away. She didn't pick it up. Neither did Mom. I reached under the counter and pulled out one last folder, labeled neatly in marker, Legal Review. I placed it in front of her, calm as stone. This one's for you, Callista, I said. In case you want to review options. She stared at it like it might explode. What is this? Copies, I replied. Every file you'd need if you decide to keep pushing this conversation. Every record of me doing the work while you pretended to care. And just so you know, I've backed everything up. The silence stretched long enough for the clock on the wall to tick 7 times. Then Mom spoke quietly. Anara, there's no need for threats. It's not a threat, I said evenly. It's protection. Grandpa looked between us, bewildered but oddly proud. You sound just like your grandmother when she stood up to the bank, he said softly. That made me smile. Then I'm doing something right. Callista's eyes narrowed. You think you can scare me with paperwork? I leaned forward just enough to let her see I wasn't bluffing. No. But I can make the truth inconvenient. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she didn't have a script ready. I took the binder back, stacked the papers neatly, and placed them under the counter. This is what doing what's right actually looks like, I said. So if you're done pretending, the door's behind you. Mom stood first, collecting her purse. We'll talk about this later. I doubt it, I said. Callista lingered a moment longer. Her gaze met mine, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in it. Just calculation, and something else beneath it. Something small. Worry. She turned on her heel and walked out. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, leaving only the steady hum of the refrigerator and Grandpa's quiet breathing. He looked at me over his cup. That was quite a morning, he said. I smiled faintly. You have no idea. I busied myself wiping the counter, though there was nothing left to clean. The sunlight through the windows caught the dust in the air, making it sparkle like static. The café felt peaceful again, but it wasn't the same kind of peace as before. This time, it was earned. Her eyes had said what her mouth never would, worry. That flicker of it stayed with me for days after she left the café, like a faint perfume you can't wash off. For once, Callista had looked uncertain, and that image gave me just enough strength to face whatever came next. 2 weeks later, an email arrived from Mom, memorial planning meeting, Saturday at 3. Location attached. There was no greeting, no request, no, how are you holding up? Just logistics. That was her way of pretending she was being neutral. I opened the attachment. It wasn't at a church or the café, it was a rented event hall downtown, one of those sterile places meant for corporate luncheons and fundraising galas. My stomach turned. Harold's life didn't belong in a ballroom. Still, I went. Because if I didn't, they'd say I was being difficult. And if I did, they'd say I was interfering. That's how it always was. Saturday afternoon in Savannah was warm, sunlight sharp against the brick sidewalks. I parked half a block from the venue, carrying a binder of notes about Grandpa's favorite songs, photos, and memories Ruth had shared in her journals. Things that mattered. I thought I'd be helping with the eulogy, or at least the program. When I walked into the hall, the chill of air conditioning hit me first, followed by the sterile smell of floor polish. Mom was near the stage with a clipboard. Callista stood in front of the podium, rehearsing into a microphone while a tech adjusted the lighting. Dad was pouring himself coffee in the corner like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mom spotted me. Oh good, you made it, she said, in that overly bright tone people use before delivering bad news. Of course I made it, I said. I told you I'd help with the eulogy. She hesitated. Right about that. What about it? She gestured toward a printed program on the table. I picked it up. My eyes ran down the list of speakers. Opening remarks, Callista Vaughn. Tribute, Isolde Farrow. Closing words, Garrett Vaughn. My name wasn't there. Instead, near the bottom, under a small italicized heading, Volunteer Staff, Refreshments, Anna Elise. For a moment, everything in the room blurred. I blinked, trying to steady my voice. Volunteer staff? Mom smiled, like it was a compliment. It's better this way, honey. You're good with the cafe atmosphere, it'll feel authentic. We thought you could handle the coffee station during the reception. I let out a short breath, more laugh than sigh. You're serious. It's not about you, she said quickly. We just want things to run smoothly. There's a certain image to maintain. An image. That's all they'd ever cared about. Right, I said quietly. And nothing ruins an image like the person who actually did the work. She frowned, as if I'd been ungrateful. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Anara. I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked toward the back of the room where the catering tables were lined up. If I'd spoken, I might have said something I couldn't take back. Callista's voice filled the room. Let's take it from the top, she told the sound tech. Try to keep the spotlight centered, please. She began again, reciting her speech, clear and confident. My grandfather, Harold Brannigan, built more than a cafe. He built community. He built connection. He built. Her words echoed through the hall like a sermon. They sounded perfect. Too perfect. Every sentence polished, every pause rehearsed. And not once, did she say my name. The volunteers setting up chairs nodded, smiling as if she were saying something profound. Maybe to them it was. But to me, it was theft dressed up as tribute. I stood behind the coffee table, watching her. Each sentence felt like another nail sealing me out of the narrative. A familiar voice startled me. Why aren't you speaking? I turned. Maris, one of the college students who worked part-time at the cafe, had slipped in to help serve drinks. Her eyes were wide, indignant on my behalf. Not my event, I said simply. She looked confused. But it's your grandfather. Exactly. I kept my hands busy, setting out mugs, stacking napkins, but my mind was spinning. The words on Callista's lips, the polite applause after each line, the way Mom and Dad nodded along, it was like watching a play where I'd been written out mid-scene. When the rehearsal ended, people drifted away to check their phones or review notes. I stayed where I was, behind the table, invisible in plain sight. The silence after the noise hit harder than I expected. I started refilling the carafes, methodically. 1, 2, 3. The sound of liquid pouring was almost soothing until my hand trembled just enough to knock over a mug. It shattered against the floor, sharp and final. No one turned. I stared at the pieces scattered across the tile. For a moment, I wanted to scream, just once, to see if anyone would react. But I didn't. I knelt, gathered the shards carefully, and slipped the broken handle into my pocket. Cold porcelain pressed against my skin like a reminder, they couldn't silence what they refused to acknowledge. Standing, I whispered to no one, if they won't give me a stage, I'll build my own. I cleaned the floor, finished arranging the table, and left before anyone noticed I was gone. That night, the house was quiet when I got home. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened a new email. The glow from the screen illuminated my hands, still faintly shaking. To Dahlia Mercer. Subject, event footage request. I paused before typing the body of the message. The words needed to be careful, measured. Hi Dahlia. I hope you're well. I'm writing to ask if your office can help me obtain public footage from the Brannigan Memorial event this Saturday. I believe multiple attendees recorded portions of the ceremony, including speeches. I'd like copies of all available recordings for personal records. I hesitated before the final line, then added it. It's time people saw what really happened. I hit send and sat back. The screen dimmed after a few seconds, leaving me in the dark with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of everything left unsaid. The broken handle was still in my pocket. I placed it on the table, the curved edge catching the faint light. A fragment of something once whole, small, but sharp enough to draw blood if handled wrong. Just like truth. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned back, listening to the quiet house settle around me. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice again, gentle but firm, don't let them decide who you are, Anara. A faint smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I won't, I whispered. The next morning, I'd start reaching out, to Maris, to the other volunteers, to anyone who'd held up their phone during Callista's performance. There were witnesses everywhere, even if they didn't realize what they'd seen. I didn't need to flip the table. I just needed the footage. By Monday morning, the clip had already made its way into the underbelly of the internet, where quiet injustice meets someone with a phone and just enough signal to broadcast it. Maris had posted it sometime Sunday night. A 35-second video of me, standing behind a catering table, pouring coffee while my sister stood under stage lighting and delivered a speech about family legacy. In the background, you could see me glance up, once, then go back to arranging cups. The caption read, "When you're written out of your own legacy." I hadn't seen it until late the next afternoon, when my phone buzzed 6 times in a row as I was counting down the last register drawer at the café. I opened it, expecting spam. Instead, I found a link to the video from one of our longtime customers with the message, "Is this you? I'm furious." I clicked the link. There I was. Silent. Serving. Cut out of the ceremony like an afterthought. By the time I refreshed the page, the views had doubled. Then doubled again. Comments poured in, strangers, students, local regulars. "This is heartbreaking. She looks like the only person who actually cared. Why wasn't she speaking?" Imagine honoring a man by erasing his granddaughter. Callista hadn't seen it yet, at least, she hadn't responded publicly. But I knew it was only a matter of time. By Tuesday morning, it was sitting at over 150,000 views. That's when Dahlia called. "I think it's time," she said without preamble. "Send me everything." I was in the back office of the café, door locked, the espresso machine hissing in the background. I reached under the desk, pulled out the file box I'd labeled Truth, and laid everything out. Email threads where I'd been excluded from meetings. Messages about restructuring the café. My notes on Grandpa's care, dozens of entries. Screenshots from the group chat where I'd suggested tribute songs and was left on read. The zoning map with the café marked in red. Callista's handwriting in the margins, good profit potential. Aging tenant. Dahlia met me the next morning at her office, a small converted bungalow with creaky floors and the smell of lemon cleaner. She wore jeans and a blazer, her hair in a braid, face calm but alert, like someone used to wading through messes just to find the thread of truth. We laid everything out on her desk. It felt almost clinical, like evidence in a trial, which in some ways, it was. "We'll prepare this in 2 formats, she said, flipping through the binder. "One for legal backup, should you need it. One for public release, if it comes to that." I raised an eyebrow. "If?" Dahlia smiled faintly. I said if to be polite. That evening, I walked back into the café just as the sun dipped below the rooftops. The place had already closed for the day, but I kept the lights on and unlocked the front door for Maris. She brought 2 USB drives, eyes wide and brimming with questions. "You're sure you want to use it?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm not looking to ruin anyone. I'm just tired of being edited out." She handed me the drive. "Well, it's got everything. The full speech, the room setup, even that moment when your mom waved someone away from the mic after they asked if you'd speak." I blinked. "Someone asked that?" She nodded. "Twice. You couldn't hear it over the applause, but I caught it. They waved them off like they were nothing." We stood in silence for a moment. Then I hugged her. Not a long hug, not a dramatic one. Just enough to say, "Thank you for seeing me." The next day, Callista responded. Not to me, of course. But to the public. A post went up on her LinkedIn. A picture of her at the podium from the memorial, her hand on her heart. The caption read, "It's unfortunate when personal grief becomes spectacle. Our family story is one of love, complexity, and resilience." The comments were polite at first. But within an hour, they changed. Why didn't Anara speak? You can't honor legacy while silencing truth. Complexity doesn't mean exclusion. Someone had taken a screenshot of the viral video and overlaid her quote next to it. The contrast was damning. A local columnist reached out that afternoon, requesting an interview. She'd seen the clip and wanted to do a story on unsung caregivers in small-town America. Callista declined. Officially, the reason was a family emergency. Unofficially, she was losing her grip. Dahlia called again on Friday. "You may want to sit down," she said. "I'm standing over the espresso machine. That count?" She chuckled. "Harold's estate lawyer called. They want to schedule a meeting with you. Privately." I didn't speak for a second. "I'm guessing that's not standard?" "Not unless your name is somewhere it wasn't before," Dahlia replied. "And Anara?" He said, and I quote, "Her name is very prominent in his final arrangements." I didn't ask what it meant. I didn't need to. All I could think about was the last time Grandpa had smiled at me from across the café. That soft half-smile that said "I see you." That had always been enough. But now, maybe the world was starting to see me, too. The next morning, I opened the café early. Not out of habit, but because I wanted to. The air smelled like fresh pastry and something sharper, momentum. By 9, the TikTok video had passed 1 million views. But more importantly, people remembered my name now. The phone call came early in the morning. Dahlia's voice was calm, but there was an undertone of anticipation that made my stomach tighten. "They've set the date," she said. "The will reading is Friday. 10 o'clock sharp. My office." I didn't ask who would be there. I already knew. The following days moved slower than I thought time could move. Every cup of coffee I poured at the cafe felt heavier, every word from a customer echoing somewhere deep in my chest. People still came by to tell me they'd seen the viral clip, that they supported me, that I was brave. I thanked them, smiled, pretended it helped. But part of me was just waiting for Friday, to end the guessing, to end the ache of not knowing. Friday arrived gray and quiet. I woke before my alarm, dressed in a simple black dress, and pulled my hair back. Not for vanity, just to look like someone who was ready for whatever truth waited in that office. Savannah's streets were wet from an early drizzle. I parked outside Dahlia's building, staring at the reflection of myself in the windshield. I didn't look like the woman who'd served coffee at her own grandfather's memorial anymore. I looked like someone who'd decided not to apologize for being in the room. Inside, the air was cool, smelling faintly of lemon polish and paper. Dahlia greeted me with her usual calm. "You okay?" she asked. As okay as someone about to watch her family implode can be. Her lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. That's honest. The conference room was small but formal, mahogany table, 3 chairs on each side, and a single folder placed neatly at the center. I took a seat beside Dahlia, hands folded in my lap. Callista arrived first, punctual as ever, her heels clicking across the tile like metronomes of entitlement. She didn't look at me, but I caught her perfume, sharp, expensive, cold. Behind her came Mom and Dad, both dressed for a funeral. Maybe that's what this was, in a way. We waited in silence until Harold's estate attorney entered. He was a tall man with graying hair and a calm presence that reminded me of Grandpa in his steadier years. He greeted everyone politely, then sat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Mr. Brannigan's final will and testament was executed under my supervision 6 months prior to his passing. There are also audio and video recordings verifying his mental capacity and intent. Ms. Mercer has reviewed these documents and confirmed their legality." Callista smirked slightly, as though that last line was meant to reassure her. I noticed her tapping one manicured nail on the table. A nervous tick, maybe. Or impatience. The attorney opened the folder. "Before I begin the primary distribution, there are several smaller bequests." He looked at Mom and Dad. "To Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn, Harold leaves his set of antique gardening tools and a donation made in your name to the local veterans' home." Mom's smile was brittle. Dad nodded stiffly. "To his friend Eli Rourke, he leaves his watch and written thanks for his loyalty. To Mrs. Eudora Barnes, he leaves a coffee grinder from the original cafe and enough funds to keep her supplied with beans for the rest of her life." I almost laughed. That was so like him, practical kindness disguised as humor. The attorney turned the page. "Now, the primary distribution." The room seemed to inhale. "Harold Brannigan's Café, Brannigan's Brew, along with his full financial holdings and property deeds, are bequeathed in total to his granddaughter, Anna Elise." The words hit like a chord struck in an empty hall. I didn't breathe. The attorney continued, his tone unwavering. His written statement reads, "To my granddaughter Anna, who never asked for anything, who showed up when no one else did, who kept my promise to Ruth alive, I leave everything. May she build something new from what we began. He paused, then turned one more page. To my granddaughter Callista Vaughn, I leave 30 cents, and this note, the price of your cruelty. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was so complete I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Callista's face went pale, then red. This is a joke, she said, standing abruptly. You can't be serious. Dahlia spoke before the attorney could. All documents are signed, notarized, and legally binding. Video evidence confirms intent. Mom's voice trembled. There must be some mistake. Harold adored both girls. The attorney's eyes softened but remained firm. He did. But he also understood the difference between loving someone and trusting them. Callista slammed her palm on the table. This is outrageous. He was manipulated. He was old. He didn't know what he was signing. Dahlia leaned forward, calm as ever. Be careful with your accusations, Ms. Vaughn. Your grandfather's competence is thoroughly documented. Dad finally spoke, voice low. Maybe we should step outside. No, Callista snapped. I'm not stepping anywhere until this is fixed. I met her eyes for the first time. There was no victory in me, no gloating. Just a quiet certainty. It's not broken, Callista. It's finally honest. Her lips parted, but no words came. Mom reached for her hand, but Callista pulled away, muttering something I couldn't hear. She gathered her purse and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the frame rattled. The attorney closed the folder gently. There's one final item, he said, turning to me. Mr. Brannigan left you a letter. He asked that it be given privately. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. The paper was thick, the handwriting unmistakable. My throat tightened. Dahlia placed a reassuring hand on my arm as the others quietly left the room. Take your time, she whispered. When the door clicked shut, I broke the seal. The first line stopped me cold. My dear Anara. If you're reading this, it means I've finally gone to see Ruth again. Don't you worry, I told her all about you. I told her you made the coffee strong and the days stronger. You didn't just help me keep this place alive, you reminded me what it meant to live. I read it twice before the words sank in. He'd known. He'd seen everything I thought I'd hidden, the exhaustion, the small joys, the weight of love carried in silence. The letter continued, each sentence like a bomb and a blade all at once. They will say you were lucky. But I know better. You earned this. You did the work no one saw. And when they come for what you've built, remember, you don't need to fight loud. Just fight true. Tears blurred the ink. I didn't even realize I was crying until one drop hit the paper. I wiped it away quickly, afraid to smudge his handwriting. At the bottom, he'd signed it simply, Love, Grandpa. When I folded the letter back into its envelope, my hands were steady. Justice hadn't come with fireworks or shouting. It had come with quiet sentences in black ink, written by a man who'd believed in me long before I believed in myself. As I stepped out into the warm savanna air, the world felt still. Not empty, just still, like it was pausing to let me catch up. The city hummed around me, cars passing, someone playing blues guitar on a nearby corner, the faint smell of jasmine drifting from a courtyard. Justice wasn't loud. But it was final. The following month passed in slow, uneven breaths. There were no more hearings, no more letters, no more calls from attorneys. The dust had settled, though the air still felt heavy. I started each morning the same way, unlocking the door to the café before the sun hit the bricks on Liberty Street, stepping inside to a quiet that had changed shape. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty anymore. It was the hush of something sacred, something that had endured. That Friday, nearly 4 weeks after the will was read, I arrived at Brannigan's Brew before 6. The city was just waking up, a few joggers passing by, the smell of gardenia wafting in from the courtyard next door. I opened the door, flipped the sign, and walked past the counter straight to Grandpa's table. I hadn't touched it since. Not once. The old copy of The Old Man and the Sea was still there, resting where he last left it. Its spine curled, pages yellowed, the bookmark tucked stubbornly between pages 82 and 83. There was a tiny vase on the table, too, a single daisy in a mason jar. The kind of simple flower Ruth always said made a room feel like someone meant to be there. I reached out and ran my fingertips along the edge of the table. It didn't need refinishing. It didn't need anything. In the back, I started the espresso machine. As it hissed to life, I moved on autopilot, grinding beans, pouring milk, wiping counters. But this time, I brewed just 1 cup. Not for a customer. For me. I sat down with it at Grandpa's table. Let the warmth spread through my hands as I looked around the empty cafe. For the first time, I saw it not as something I was protecting, but something I had inherited in full, scratches, memories, and all. A few minutes later, I heard the front door creak open. Maris walked in, carrying a pastry box and a new bulletin board under her arm. "Hey," she said with a smile that still carried the remnants of disbelief. "You beat me again." "I always will," I said, sipping the coffee. "It's my name on the lease now, remember?" She laughed. "I brought blueberry scones. Real ones. No weird vegan substitutions." We unpacked together in a rhythm we'd built quietly over the past months. By 7:30, the cafe was warm with chatter, chairs scraping gently across the tile, and the occasional burst of laughter from the back corner. A woman I didn't recognize dropped a folded note into the tip jar. I waited until she left to unfold it. "Thank you for keeping this place human." It was written in black ink, all caps, no name. I didn't need one. By mid-morning, the pace slowed, the early rush thinning. I slipped into the office and checked the mail. There was a thin envelope from Callista's attorney, formally dropping the challenge to the will. No apology. No explanation. Just legal closure. I didn't frame it. I didn't even keep it. I dropped it straight into the shredder, watching the pages turn to ribbons. The last I'd heard, she'd moved to Atlanta. The kind of move you make when you want to rebrand, not rebuild. No one in Savannah had seen her in weeks. Mom never called. Neither did Dad. I imagined their house was quieter now, the air stale with all the things they didn't say to each other. Part of me wondered if they still looked at photos of Grandpa and convinced themselves they'd loved him well. But I didn't wonder for long. That Sunday, the cafe closed early. I stayed behind to deep clean the espresso machine, reorganize the back storage, and print out a new menu board for summer specials. At some point, I grabbed a piece of stationery and sat down at the corner table with a pen. I started writing. "Dear Ruth. You don't know me, but I've known you all my life. Through Grandpa's stories, through the smell of cinnamon rolls that somehow lingered long after the ovens cooled. Through the way he talked to your photo, like you still had opinions on everything from bean roast to jazz playlists. He stayed brave, Ruth. You would have been proud. He fought when no one else would have. And when he couldn't fight anymore, he made sure someone would do it for him. I didn't always know that someone would be me. But now I do." I folded the letter and placed it behind the book on the table. Not for anyone to read. Just so it would be there. Before leaving, I locked up the register, swept the floor, and wiped down every surface one last time. The cafe didn't feel perfect. It felt lived in. Real. Honest. The final thing I did was sit again at Grandpa's table. Just for a moment. The evening light poured in through the front windows, turning the air gold. I took a deep breath and looked at the photo of Grandpa and Ruth that I had framed earlier that week. I placed it gently on the shelf behind the counter. Right next to the grinder he rebuilt with his own hands, and the sign Ruth had painted in faded red, "Good people. Good coffee. Good mornings." They were still there. The cafe stayed exactly the same. And everything felt different. Some people think justice has to be loud, filled with shouting, confrontation, or public drama. But sometimes, justice is quiet. It shows up in a signature, in a folded letter, in the steady presence of someone who never left. This story reminds us that being underestimated can be your greatest strength, and that love, not blood, defines legacy. What would you have done in Anra's place? Have you ever been erased by your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't